Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Coder Career with me, Cameron Blackwood. If you aren't familiar, I'm an ex-technical recruiter who's now become a software engineer, and this podcast is a way for me to show my experience from both sides of the table and interview some amazing guests from all over the tech spectrum. Today, my guest is Liska, who I've worked with back in my recruitment days, although she wasn't actually a recruiter. And she now also is a software engineer coming from a different background as well. So she'll have a ton of insight and has had some really interesting experience. She's also our first international guest, which is very exciting. She is coming here from Berlin, so Eurovision style. Hello, Berlin. This is Edinburgh. How are you doing?
Hello, Edinburgh. Great to hear you. Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm really happy to be on your podcast. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Not at all. Absolute pleasure. So, for listeners who haven't heard from you before, can you give like a brief background about who you are, what your story is, and how you ended up working in tech?
Sure. So the abbreviated version is I fairly randomly studied classical archaeology, so Greek and Roman stuff, at university in the UK, and then I found a job in Berlin in marketing. It was completely unrelated. And subsequently, because what I was writing about a lot and what our company that we were both working in was involved with was putting developers in jobs, I learned more and more about software developer roles and what software development is actually. And with a growing interest, I ended up moving into that field.
Fantastic. Sounds great. So you didn't specify because you're being very humble, but I know for a fact you went to Oxford. So studying classics at Oxford to software engineering, that's a pretty wild sort of transition. So that's very cool. What's the main programming you're focusing on at the moment?
Yeah, at the moment I'm doing JavaScript or more specifically TypeScript, which is a flavor of JavaScript. And I'm using that as a front-end engineer to work with React.
Awesome. That is pretty much exactly my tech stack as well, and I must say I am loving it. I'm currently doing that for a company called Purple Bricks, and we are trying to be the new way to buy a house in the UK. So if you're selling your house or buying a house, check us out. You may come into some components that I designed, so that'd be very cool. So anyway, enough about my my current job. I've got some quick fire questions for you, Liska, if that's all right, just so the listeners can get to know you a bit better. So first and foremost, what was your first ever computer?
I shared a bit of a... I shared an absolute brick of a computer that my granddad had from his university days with my brother. And I think pretty much it might have had the internet, but I think we needed to ask my granddad to switch it on for us. And it had some very 90s games on it. And I loved it. It was fantastic. That was my main computer for a lot of years.
Nothing beats 90s games. That aesthetic is great. I mean, I had so many good memories of playing on the absolute brick that was my parents' old family computer, and no doubt installing a ton of malware in my wake.
Yeah, it has a lot of lovable features, I think, and but it's very characterful. You can say that about it for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, characterful is the exact word. Although in my experience, that's also the word people use when a house is falling apart. But yeah.
Characterful, interesting, it's much of a muchness.
So you're someone that's travelled quite a lot in your career as well. So this will be quite an interesting question, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on it. In terms of tech cities, which one's your favourite in the world?
Yeah, I think a lot of tech cities have different things going for them. So I've been to San Francisco, which was quite spectacular in many ways. I have never worked there, but I really enjoyed being in the city itself. I grew up near Edinburgh, where you currently are, and now I'm in Berlin, which is Silicon Alley. To live in, it's fantastic here. And I think Edinburgh is also a very exciting place as somebody in tech to be in. But actually, I was speaking just yesterday with a friend of mine who's also Russian, and I'm half Russian. We were discussing Moscow because I think there's a lot happening there in tech at the moment. I have a lot of curiosity about it as a place that I'd quite maybe like to live at some point in the future. And I think in general it's a really interesting city to live in.
Yeah, it's a very interesting place, and a lot of very talented programmers already reside there. So it's kind of a natural progression. It's already a very strong regional hub. That I think I agree with you. There's already been there's a lot of, because I mean you'll know this much better than me, but Russian internet is its very own ecosystem in terms of what's the big networking site called? Is it VK?
Yeah, Vkontakte, which means in contact. Yeah, everybody uses this Vkontakte, and I mean, recently, a lot of people moved to using things like Telegram, partly, and especially at least in Berlin, among people I know, and this is also a Russian company. I think I think they're actually based in Dubai, but anyway, I think there are a lot of very kind of high energy and interesting things coming out of there at the moment.
Yeah, sounds exciting. I visited about must be getting on 10 years ago now, and I absolutely loved it. I thought, and St. Petersburg as well. I mean, Russia's definitely one of the most interesting places I've ever been. It was awesome, and hopefully go back one day. But yeah, it would be cool to collaborate with some people in Moscow for sure one day. What about when you're getting on with your work? Are you more music or podcasts? What floats your boat?
Oh, music for sure. I hadn't even thought of listening to a pod. Do people do that? Is that a thing?
It depends. I think if I'm doing admin, I'm more of a podcast person. I don't think I've said this on the Code of Career actually. I'm probably more of a podcast person when I'm doing admin stuff. If I'm sort of neck deep in JavaScript or TypeScript these days, I probably can't do it because it's kind of you're doing two things at once. So I often like this going to sound so lame, but I got the Mr. Robot soundtrack. I don't know if you've seen Mr. Robot. It's really good. It's about a hacker group based in New York. And this is so lame, but I got the official soundtrack, and I've been coding with that in the background. And I feel so cool, and it's really good for concentration. So yeah, I'm more music when I'm coding. Anyway, so your music as well yourself?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, now I think about it, I listen to podcasts when I'm cycling because I want my attention to be focused on the words. But for some reason, songs with lyrics don't bother me so much when I'm typing. Although when I'm like in serious, super concentrating mode, and this is for exams or for programming or whatever, then I'm either on Django Reinhardt or the Four Seasons by Vivaldi, which is not necessarily what I'm listening to the rest of the time, but for concentrating, it's on point.
Very nice. Yeah. What was the last thing you played on Spotify? Was it one of those or?
I think it was something by Tupac. So no.
Nice.
Yeah, hit 'em up or something. I think. Yeah.
Lot of contrast in those choices. I like it. And what about for when you're working? Would you say you're early bird, night owl? When do you find you do your most effective work?
I'm very dramatically inconsistent with this. So I'm an insomniac, so I sometimes go through phases where I physically can't get up early because I haven't slept much. Which is, I mean, that doesn't mean I necessarily work better later, but it means that working early is not an option. However, when I'm in a good rhythm, and which I generally try to be, I actually like to get up pretty early, like 7 o'clock, which I think now that we're all working from home, and at least in Berlin, this is currently the norm for most tech companies, I think, and jobs that you can do remotely. I like to be online an hour and a half before everybody else. It means that I can kind of carefully and at my own pace look over things that maybe I haven't finished off entirely in like the way that I really want them, or just double check code that I've done before, like I make a pull request on it or something like this. There's no rush, if you get up at 15 minutes before you have to be, well, before you have a call or something, then it's a little bit disorientating. So I like the morning. It's a long way of saying.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to roll out of bed like 5 minutes for a stand up, because I've done that a couple of times, and your brain's just not even there. Like I agree. I think it's an hour and a half for me is a sweet spot of being being up before the first sort of stand up.
And it's good
But
as well
yeah.
because people aren't messaging you for things. You know, when other people are online, then it's important that you can be responsive to certain questions or so it's nice to have a time in the morning before other people are up to have some uninterrupted focus.
Yeah, exactly, and it stops you sort of messing about sort of late at night and wasting time. For me, like if I know I have to be up early, like I know not going to be up until 1 a.m. playing Far Cry or something like that. Like, which, don't get me wrong, feels great at the time, but it does not feel so great when you're waking up thinking, I could do this when I was 14. Like.
Yeah, we've been there, and 14 was a while ago for all of us.
Yeah, unfortunately so. Rapidly, I'm looking in the rearview mirror at those years. But yeah, what about? And this is a very serious question across the dev community, and something that people have battled over for a long time now. Do you prefer spaces or tabs when you format your code?
Okay. I'm gonna ask everybody to keep me in their friend group, like regardless of what my answer might be. But yeah, I've been raised for the last couple of months that I've been working, so I'm quite new to programming still with tabs, and I don't know, spaces didn't even really occur to me. It seems like if you're using, from my perspective, if I'm using spaces, there's a lot of spacing to be done. If I'm using tabs, it's a lot more like, yeah, there's less of it, which I think is a good thing for a lot of things.
That's the correct answer from my side. Tabs is the way. It's just so much. It's just neater. It's so intangible, but I'm just not a spaces fan. I mean, it means nothing with linters and that kind of thing that will automatically lint your code for you. And if you're someone who's learning to code and listening right now who doesn't know what a linter is, look up ESLint in VS Code and you will save yourself. I'm sure both of us, as people that were primarily self-taught, can vouch for. You will save yourself a lot of time with formatting code properly, especially if it's especially if it's a language that's sensitive to formatting. Like JavaScript, you can get away with it. Python, you really can't. So you have to be careful because the wrong space can break your entire application. So got to be careful with that. And what about when you are? What powers your tabbed code? Is it coffee, tea, energy drinks, or the first guest that I spoke to last week? Sorry, I should say the first out of the box answer that I got from a guest was he has only drunk water since he was 4 years old. So I couldn't believe that. Hasn't drunk anything else. No alcohol, no caffeine, no tea. I couldn't believe it. So I don't know if you're going to top Ethan's answer there, but
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I mean, respect. I am. I'm also a big water fan. Actually, I pretty much only drink coffee, black, mint tea, and water. Sometimes hot with lemon is also nice. But yeah, I used to be almost too firmly in the coffee camp, and I had to cut down from my 12 espressos per day significantly. Yeah. I do, just alternating, and just drinking away every half hour, and eventually you get through them. So now I try to have my 2 or 3 cups of coffee in the morning. To wake me up, keep me sane and able to communicate, and then I'm on the tea and water after 1 p.m. usually, or decaf on a rare occasion.
12 coffees a day is impressive. Like I'm quite caffeine tolerant, but I think that might give me the jitters.
Yeah. I mean, it's not impressive in a good way, unfortunately. Not something to aspire to.
That takes me back to revising for finals a few years ago, for sure. Although that was more Red Bull and that kind of thing, so even stronger.
Much of a muchness.
Yeah. What about before you got into code? Because both of us, neither our first careers, so to speak, were in code. Although we both transitioned into coding pretty early on in our careers. When you were younger, when you were a kid, what did you want to do for a job? So it can be completely different a lot of the time. Like I want to be a vet, for instance.
You wanted to be a bat?
A vet, VET. Might have worked with bats, but yeah, I want to be a vet. Yeah.
I see. Okay. It's somewhat more kind of achievable, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't have any very kind of specific aspirations. I wanted to do something that I enjoyed doing. That was always my number one. But I think the only thing that like I had solidly for a good couple of years between like the ages of 11 and 15 was flying wooden biplanes. I really wanted to be basically I was reading a lot of Biggles and I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but not in like the modern jets, but and not actually fighting, because I just want to fly the planes with the multiple wings. I don't want to shoot at people. So that was my possibly my only kind of career aspiration growing up as a kid.
That's really cool. I like that. Next time you're back in East Lothian, there's an airfield somewhere near North Berwick. I'm not sure exactly where, but they fly all those historic planes. So if you haven't caught it already, it's definitely worth seeing.
I have been. They have a Concorde there. I went there on a school trip.
Did they?
Yeah.
I didn't know there was like a museum and stuff. I'll have to check that out. In terms of we've talked about getting into tech. What was it that? Obviously, we worked together at Talent.io. You were in marketing. I was selling the recruitment platform. What got you into coding? What was the inspiration? And how did you end up becoming a full-time engineer?
Mm-hmm. So initially, I looked into JavaScript because you start off with HTML and CSS, of course, but I started looking into programming because I was writing about it all the time for work, and I don't like the feeling that I don't know what I'm writing about. And I think until you have actually programmed something, you don't have a good idea of what code is, in fact, or at least I really didn't. I don't know what I imagined it to be, but I was surprised when I started programming as to what the internet and all these apps and is actually made of. So I just started it out as a bit of fun. I was also kind of new in Berlin at the time, and there was a nice social scene around it. So that was fun. You get to know a couple of people, and you enjoy spending time with them and programming something. So you keep going along. So it was learning about my then job as well, in a way, and I just got more and more interested in it. And then I think I was pretty inconsistent with it for a couple of years, but increasingly I was realizing that both the kind of what I knew from working inside an HR company that focused on tech, about the kind of culture that surrounds programming and how it is to work as a developer. I really liked what I saw of that kind of environment, I was also at the same time really enjoying the programming itself that I was doing in my spare time.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds good. And in terms of the initial spark, was it because it was helping your job in marketing? Was that why that you wanted to dive deeper into it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I say, it's in order to know what I was writing about. When I was writing articles about programming, it really helps to have some kind of concept of what programming is, rather than just. It's quite easy, I think, sometimes to do a job that's just touching programming and knowing the kind of keywords and having an idea of like front-end developer develops the website, back-end developer develops the database, but then not getting past that kind of abstraction into what code actually is, and I wanted to understand that as well when I was working on it. So for that reason I made an active effort to do some coding myself, in order to know what I was talking about.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, that's going the extra step with content marketing. So that's really cool. And you already touched on the kind of social scene around technology in Berlin. How do you find the tech scene is in Berlin? Is it would you recommend maybe grads from the UK move over to Berlin, other parts of the world? Would you recommend it? What's cool about it?
I mean, I think Berlin's great to live in general, especially for people who excuse me, especially for people who are fluent English speakers, because there's such a large English speaking community here, and there are so many job opportunities in jobs which require you to work in English. So there's an easy way in. There's not that initial barrier. Other than that, I mean, absolutely, I would recommend it, because why not? It's really interesting to experience living in a different place. And I think as well, when you're surrounded by new things, you tend to try out things that you might not have tried out in your original environment. It's very stimulating, and Berlin's a very friendly city. Usually the weather's nice. At the moment it's kind of not, but it's a nice place to live. And I find what I like most about it is that people really kind of don't expect other people to behave in a certain way. It's so long as you're not upsetting anybody else, you can do whatever you like. You can and nobody's going to sort of judge you for that. And yeah, so I like it. It's very chill. And yeah, the tech scene here is pretty big as well, and has all of those vibes.
Yeah, it's a very you do you kind of city. I always found that, and definitely you couldn't with the English factor, like speaking English. It's I can believe it, because I've done a bit of work in Berlin, and I speak a little bit of German, and I was trying to use it to order a drink in the bar, and the bartender literally didn't understand me. Which, to be fair, could have been because my German was awful. But I think it was because he only spoke English, because he spoke back to me in English. So it can it's funny, because it's almost like Berlin really feels like its own culture within Germany. It's like a microstate in itself almost, from when I've been.
Yeah, I'd say that if your aim is to do programming and learn German at the same time, then don't come here. Go to Munich.
Yeah, go to Munich. Yeah.
But because it's really difficult to convince people to speak to you in German sometimes. I've been here for 3.5 years, and my German is okay, but it should be a bit better than that, I feel, for myself already, and this is because it's never needed, unless you really make an effort for it. But yes. That aside, it's a fantastic city to live. I think in many ways kind of similar to Edinburgh. Actually, I also had a similar sort of feeling from being there. It's very comfortable to be in.
Yeah, it's an interesting place, and in Germany in general, to be fair, it's hard to practice your German, because everyone's so nice about it. First off, and second off, everyone wants to practice their English, and is so forgiving of you even speaking a little bit of German. Everyone's so nice about it and just says, "Let's continue in English." But yeah, it's Berlin is an awesome place. So if listeners haven't been, definitely get yourself out there, even if it's just for a holiday rather than to move. It's very cool. I definitely recommend. And in terms of for young people that are, I look at the demographics of this listener base, and although we don't have a ton of listeners yet, the trend I can see is it's mainly people that are of sort of university age or younger. What would you say to someone in that position, maybe between 16 and 22, that is thinking about getting into programming as a career? What would you advise them on the best route to do?
I would say, I mean, it sort of depends a little bit whether you're already studying computer science, or if like me and you, you're kind of going in from a completely different subject. I don't think I'd be able to give a fantastic insight on the best route for somebody who is coming from a degree, simply because that hasn't been my experience of it. But then again, I think there are a lot of opportunities for new grads, and companies are offering a lot of internships, and in Berlin as well, and in Germany. I think in general there's a thing called being a working student, where they actually have positions specifically for students from a specific field. So yeah, so if you're doing computer sciences, if you're coming from another subject, I would say find some. I'd say for a start, do it. It's really fun. It's fantastic. You get to use your brain. You get to be around nice people. You get to really see a project that you're working on being used and functioning, and it's very creative. Actually, I think I don't know if people often. I don't think that's maybe necessarily always highlighted, because you think, oh, engineering, that's, it's like maths and stuff. But actually, there's a lot, especially as a front end programmer. I can't speak so much for the back end. There's a lot of design and sort of decisions on the user interface and the experience, and there's quite a lot of psychology almost in a way, thinking about, is this nice to use? So I would say that everybody has skills that are transferable to software engineering, regardless of whether they're studying that subject or a different subject. You can think about how what you're interested in sort of gives you a particular perspective on programming, and leverage that and utilize that. I'd say find some small projects that you'd be interested in building. And for me, what really worked in terms of learning software development was a hybrid of sort of doing courses, perhaps. Often there are a lot of very good free online courses, so it's not a sort of massive investment or a barrier to entry in that sense. So there's a lot of educational material. There's Stack Overflow, which is where you find the answer to all of your problems and everybody else's problems. There's all of the documentation for different languages. And I'd say try following some courses, but then also applying what you learned. I don't know if that worked for you, Cameron. I think you had a kind of similar approach. I saw you doing 100 days of code when you were like.
Yeah, it's very much the same thing. It's consistency. It's like practicing anything. Like you're not going to get good at anything overnight. And definitely the thing that I always try and drive home to people is, if you're going to do 10 hours a week, don't do it all on Saturday. Like just, I can't do the math. I've really put myself with, that's a difficult equation. You can't do one, it's much better to do 1.2 hours a day. And I'm probably aptly demonstrating there, you don't need to be great at maths to be a software engineer. I think I've had to, I think I was literally thinking about this the other day about data structures and algorithms. I think I've had to do a binary search once, which is like CS 101. So in terms of more advanced stuff, obviously it's actually, to be honest, mainly used in interview processes, and not for most companies. It's only for certain big tech companies they use them, mainly as a way to see what your kind of baseline kind of aptitude is. So if you study, it's a very specific thing you have to study for. So in my experience, it's exactly as you say, just basically consistent practice and solving problems that you want to solve through easy web tools, and just sometimes not being afraid to just put it out there. You're never going to know if you're ready, but you've got to start putting yourself out there on the job market and seeing who might be interested, because even if it's like an internship position, it can spring into something much bigger, and then before you know it, you're climbing the ladder. And I've been working officially as a mid-level for about 3 months now, and it's been awesome. And I literally probably wrote my first line of code 3 years and 2 months ago. So it's been a really exciting journey so far. And if anyone's listening has been plugging away, you could be so close to that elusive first job offer. So as the saying goes, if you're going through hell, keep going. Not that programming should ever be hellish, but
no, hopefully you don't have to go through that to get there. But yeah, I think as something that's often missed out, or at least was not emphasized to me, which I then found made a lot of difference when I started working, and correct me if you disagree, but rather than the actual programming itself per se, are all of the different tools that you use to interact with this. So I include in that everything from just knowing how to Google a problem that you're having, which now seems very obvious, and you copy paste, etc. But was not, for me at least, when I was starting out. It was very hard to find what I was looking for. And then things like using Git and GitHub. This can also be, at least from my experience and from what I've seen from some other people who I've been learning with, is something that you don't prioritize because, that's not the actual code. But actually, this is really an essential collaboration tool. And part of what's really I found a big difference working in a team, which is what most people will be doing once they're actually working as software engineers, is being able to collaborate in a really kind of clean and understandable way. So communication is a big part of it too. Yeah. That was a big learning curve.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about GitHub and source control in general, because there was a great Reddit post, and if I can find it, I will link it in the description of this podcast. But the author basically explained that it's like hacks to basically save the seniors on your team time as a junior, and the number one is to make sure you know source control inside out. It will just really accelerate your learning, because even at a very basic level, and I've told the story in the podcast before, so I won't bore repeat listeners, but basically, long story short, I was cutting and pasting my code and manually inserting it into GitHub file by file, because I was literally treating it like my Google Drive or something. So, it was just such a roundabout way of doing something so simple. But once you learn version control and you start collaborating on it with your friends and peers, then it makes it so much easier. And learning more complex stuff like rebasing, pulling in, merging from your main branch, it's just so important and so critical for your day-to-day work. And your senior devs will really appreciate you understanding that. And things like that, they make the difference in job interviews, and they'll make the difference if you're, an intern looking to go full time. We already mentioned how Berlin does that really well with the work student program. So, anyone listening in Germany, that's a great way to get yourself noticed and go full time. Is to just be super productive using version control and just not being afraid to learn that side of things. I couldn't state it enough. Even though I've stated it quite a lot there.
Yeah, I think it's also very straightforward when you get into it, and I really, really mean that. It's scary because it's another thing to learn and a new thing to learn, but it is not complex. I can think of maybe, actually in my Slack messaging for work, I have a list for myself, which I wrote right at the beginning, of useful commands in order to work with my code. And I think maybe there are some people who don't know what version control is as well, who might be listening. The reason that Git is so important is because when you're working on a programming project as a team, you might often have one sort of main source of truth for your code, one version of it. And as you're working on it, you don't want to edit the good version, because if you make mistakes and you make them on the good version, then this is a problem for your actual website. So what you do instead is you make copies of the good version, you work on them, and then you merge them literally into the main version, while after people have checked, other people have reviewed that's all good. So being able to do this well is the difference between having kind of understandable and clean feature that you're working on presented to your fellow engineers for them to read and understand, versus a bit of a mess and not really being able to contribute effectively.
Yeah, little and often is the key with pull requests. Little and often, basically, don't make too many drastic changes in one. But if you're able to sequentially kind of merge in new features, new fixes, it's great practice. Even if you're working by yourself, just practice it. And whatever you're working on, I've been working on some personal projects recently, and I've just been trying to be really disciplined about working on new, what we call branches, and merging them in, because if you've never done it before, it's great practice. And what you can do is you can, on stuff like GitHub, the Atlassian suite, you can can link everything together, and it works very nicely for a workflow. So that again leads into like project management and that kind of thing, the sort of stuff you won't learn if you're learning by yourself, or if you're learning on a CS degree, or if you're in a boot camp. You can literally only learn it at work, but you can get a jump start and be ahead of the curve. And the seniors on your team will appreciate you for it, and they'll have more time freed up to help you with the more serious problems you're having. So it's definitely a good thing to learn. I mean, we've talked about kind of bootcamp, self-teaching, higher education. Obviously, neither of us did a technical degree. What was your experience like with higher education in general, though? Would you recommend the university route to others, or would you say if you want to be a coder, it's better to actually kind of leave school at 18 or whatever, and then just basically smash away through online tutorials or a bootcamp?
I think it really depends on not only what your end goal is, but actually just what you want to spend your time doing. So I didn't do a degree because I thought that I would end up being an archaeologist, and I didn't do a degree because I felt like I ought to go to university either. I think that's a shame if people are going to do higher education just because that's what people do and you're not sure what to do otherwise. I would say that's a bit of a waste of time from my perspective. I think I would do a degree if you feel like you want to spend 3 years, 4 years studying a subject. If you think that writing essays on the followers of Alexander the Great sounds like great fun, then do a degree, and in that case in classical archaeology. Or if you really want to study computer science, do computer science. But I would just say at the same time that it's not a must for programming. I think for programming, it's much more valuable, and since we talked about GitHub, to show that you're able to program. And this doesn't go for all companies. If you want to, I'm not an expert in this specifically, but I think there are certain companies that if you want to join them as an entry level, then they look for a computer science degree. However, also, there's always a chance to apply to these kind of places later on. I think, after you have a couple of years work experience and nobody cares what you studied or whether you studied at all anymore. And otherwise, I'd say it's much more important to show that you have personal projects. So having a GitHub is very important from this perspective as well, because it's a kind of portfolio of your code. It can function like that. And also in your technical interview, in your interviews in general, actually, I think it's very important to first show that you're going to be nice to work with. So the more important thing is to be able to communicate well, to seem fun, and like people are going to want to spend 40 hours a week hanging around with you in their team. And also being able to, aside from kind of learning technical stuff, is being able to understand and explain why you're choosing to do something in a particular way, or what your thought process is behind the way you code. So I'd say projects, and also understand why you're coding like you're coding. It doesn't have to be perfect. In the interview that I had for the company I'm currently working in, I think one of the main questions that I got asked about how I'd implemented part of a particular project, and what would I do if X, I actually didn't know the answer to, and I said that I couldn't think of sort of an answer that I thought, yes, this is it, and I just explained my thought process. Well, maybe what I'm thinking is if I want to have this kind of implementation, I might have this sort of problem, but I'm not sure about that aspect of it. Explain, be clear, and I think people appreciate that, actually. And other skills can be taught on the job. That's hard skills. You'll acquire them as you go along, and you shouldn't have them all as an entry-level engineer. That's kind of scary.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the old adage, right? Hire for attitude, train for skills, or is it the other way around? No, it's definitely that way around. So it's very much that way, and I'd absolutely echo what you say. It's about the interview is very much cultural, particularly for an entry level engineer. It's about showing humility, the fact that you're happy to have your code critiqued and you'll graciously accept feedback, but then also as well that you're not afraid to voice your opinion on things in a polite way, of course. And companies love it if a junior developer wants to get stuck in and make suggestions. So it's definitely a good thing. And the other thing as well is explaining technical concepts to non-technical people. Then if you can explain things to HR without either going over their head or being patronizing, it's a great it's a difficult medium to hit sometimes if you're trying to explain something a bit complicated technically. So that's an important skill to practice, and that's the sort of thing you can practice with like your friends and family that aren't coders. So that's it's really good to work on that. So you're working at Spielworks at the moment, right? So what's the kind of stuff you're working on, or is it classified?
It's not so classified. I'd love to be able to say it was. I think that sounds kind of mysterious and exciting, but yeah, it's nonetheless exciting. So Spielworks is a Berlin-based company dealing. They have two products. One is a crypto wallet. And the other is a gaming platform, which I believe it's the first or even the only gaming platform with crypto rewards. So there's a kind of nice intersection of people who are interested in games, therefore people who are kind of online gaming, and people who are very kind of tech savvy and also interested in therefore kind of blockchain technologies, because it's something else that's kind of up and coming technology, and Spielworks is kind of at the intersection of these. And specifically, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of work around NFTs. If you know what that is, it's non-fungible tokens. So things like famously, there is on the Ethereum blockchain something called CryptoKitties, which were being sold for crazy amounts of money. They're pictures of cats, essentially. I mean, who doesn't love a picture of a cat? But I'm not dealing those. But NFTs can be like bits of artwork, or it's property on the blockchain, essentially. And I guess the kind of this is very relevant for games and gamers, where you're dealing with a lot of kind of online visual assets, and it can be nice to have things that you not only kind of gain in a game, but things that you own from that game. So that's what I'm working on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting solution to the digital assets problem, where things don't have a physical presence anymore. It's verifying who owns what, and with artwork, with the world moving as quickly as it is, art is naturally going to change. And I think NFTs are a really interesting answer to that. I mean, obviously all the kinks haven't been ironed out yet, but it's really exciting, and the potential is quite something. I mean, I was reading on the BBC the other day about the. Do you remember the Charlie Bit My Finger video? Those kids. It was like one of the first viral videos. They sold it as an NFT for $750K. So both the lads like paid for university and everything off the back of it. So it's a really interesting kind of concept, and I think something that's actually been long overdue online, really, considering the world has now been online for getting on 30 years.
I'm actually talking about the world being online for nearly 30 years and people selling iconic things. I read recently that Tim Berners-Lee, and I don't know when he did this, but he sold a representation of the original source code of the internet for, I think, just a bit over $5 million, I presume. As an NFT as well. So there's some, it's not all pictures of cats. There's different. Anything that you can kind of experience digitally, I think, can be an NFT. And I say that without like a huge amount of grounding in that subject. Largely, I'm implementing how these NFTs are displayed in our front end. And for gamers, if you're playing a game, you invest a lot of time in this virtual world, and you might be picking up certain assets. Say I played RuneScape. that's my main gaming experience. As a kid, I don't own any of the swords that I put in, a lot of hard time to smelt and fought for. And it's this sort of thing that when you finish playing a game, you kind of quote unquote lose the progress that you made there. You lose what you've been working towards. And with NFTs, if you have assets that are no longer in the game, but they're actually on the blockchain from the game, then you can actually have ownership of the things that you've worked towards. So it's a bit of a it's a new concept, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, Steam kind of had a predecessor to this. I don't know if you're aware with their like trading cards, and it was. I don't think they're backed by NFTs or anything. I think they're just basically distributed, and they'll sell for a lot of money. And it's quite interesting. You basically just earn them by playing games, and it's an interesting world. And I think stuff like I've been reading about like rare sports cards and that kind of thing. Like I never really, it's one of those things I haven't considered. Like I used to collect like football cards when I was a kid, and actually it turns out the really rare ones are worth a lot of money. So I might have a dig around my parents' attic when I'm next time back home, because you never know.
It's exactly the same concept, actually. I'd say the main difference is that, once something's on the blockchain, it's there for good. So there's no chance that you can have the company or I don't know, whatever services kind of providing or hosting or something your cards. I don't know exactly how that works, but go down and then you lose things. It's it's on the blockchain for forever.
Yeah, because it's a distributed network, right? So there's no single source can just pull it down. You'd have to control the vast majority of network.
Not feasible, and if you do, then
happen.
It sort of makes the whole. if anybody does achieve that, then it sort of makes the whole blockchain valueless. So in a way, it sort of defeats its own purpose. So why would you take something over when it's then and use a massive amount of computer power to do this when it would then be just totally devalued? But I'm fairly new still to this realm, so there's a lot to find out about that.
And if someone's managing to take the vast majority control of some important infrastructure, then we've probably got bigger problems than the fact they've taken control because they possess that kind of computational power.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. That sounds really interesting. And is your company hiring right now? Because I know there might be devs in Berlin that are potentially looking.
Ooh, I am not sure. I can send a link to the website. I must say I'm pretty oblivious on the HR side of things now. I should have probably looked up this before going on the pod, but I can link to the website anyway, and then people can look around and see if there are any jobs. It's a wonderful company. I was incredibly lucky to be found by them. It's an amazing place to work at. The team, the people, the project, it's all a lot of fun, very interesting.
Awesome. That's a glowing recommendation. That sounds really good. So I'll pop the link in the description to Spielworks. And is it only people in Germany? Is it remote? Are you allowed to work in? Is it full-time office? How's the setup?
Yeah. So again, a little bit hard to say, also because I've only been working for them remotely. So everybody is remote at the moment. We have an office in Berlin, and people occasionally go there. I'm going there tomorrow, actually, and I would say also the vast majority of the people who work with us at the moment are in Berlin. However, I do believe there are one or two people working from other places. We have somebody I think who's in Ireland or something like this. So I think there is the possibility that they're open so long as the time is not like miles different, and in terms of whether it's a full time, yes, it is. So I'm working roughly, let's say, 9 to 5, but they're very flexible on everything like that. I mean, the important thing is the work, and are you available for your meetings? Are you reachable? And do you kind of produce what is expected of you? And if yes, then you can organize yourself as you want. There's no micromanagement. It's fantastic. Really.
That sounds great. So I guess on that note, really, we've covered quite a lot of kind of the ecosystem around Berlin. What you need to learn as a dev. Is there anything anything else that you'd like to plug? Have you got any blogs or anything you're working on at the moment?
I haven't got any blogs, but there's one organization that I came across in Berlin that I'm a massive fan of, and I would like to bring them up for both actually experienced developers and people who are learning to program. So when I came here, I found an organization called CodeBar. And they really pulled me through learning to program, and they're focused on helping people from minority backgrounds in tech to enter. So this can be there's a much smaller proportion of women in tech. There's a much smaller proportion of people who maybe haven't had a higher education, or people who even are coming from different fields. So it's very kind of broad, but the idea is to help people who haven't had the sort of traditional route into tech to get where they need to be. And they're doing fantastic work. They're they're doing all of their meetings online now. It's every other week per location, and they're spreading across the world. So they're in London. There's a group in Edinburgh. There's a group in Berlin. There's probably, I think I even heard of one in Hong Kong or something similar. And they are both great for students who are wanting to get some help on their projects. What they do is they pair you up with a mentor who is doing the language that you're interested in, who's a professional developer. And then you spend 2 hours coding together, working out. You can work on a kata, like a coding problem, or you could work on a project that you've been developing, or you can work through. They have some online courses as well. And I also really want to bring them up to people who are currently working as developers, because it's very important that there are people who are interested in teaching, showing up and helping to coach and helping more people to learn to program in this way. Yeah. So I can also send you a link to that organization.
Yeah, that sounds great. I've heard they do amazing work, and I'm definitely keen on getting down to the Edinburgh one. And any experienced developers listening, remember, one of the best ways to make sure you understand your fundamentals really inside out is to teach them to someone else. Either mentor someone at work, get down to an organization like CodeBar. This is an industry where we want to help each other up, lift each other up, and one of the best ways to do that is mentor someone either internally or externally, and that sounds like a great way to do that. So I'll pop that down in the description as well. So thank you everyone for listening to this, and thank you so much for your time, Liska. It's been really great to catch up and hear all about what's going on in Berlin, and finally have an international guest on the show, because this is episode 6 or 7 and we haven't had anyone yet, so that's really exciting. Coder career spreading across the world. So if you have any questions as well, I'm preparing to do a Q&A podcast in a few weeks' time. So I'm kind of loading those up a little bit. I've had a few through already. So get your questions in the codercareer@gmail.com. But until then, I've been Cameron Blackwood with Liska Crofts for the Coder Career Podcast. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.